Welcome to the AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today my guest is Mark Allen. He's the Executive Vice President of Business Development at AutoAp. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thanks a lot, Brian. I'm really anxious to have a chance to spend some time here and hopefully provide some information that'll be of value to the viewers.
Let's dive into recalls.
Okay.
And how they impact dealers. What's the current state of recalls? Let's dive into that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I would say if I had to describe it in a nutshell, the recalls are a bit of a mess right now. You can hardly pick up a newspaper or industry trade magazine without reading about the latest recall. It impacts hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions of vehicles. It doesn't seem to be slowing down. So it's a every couple of day occurrence. A new recall comes out. Like I said, they can impact millions of vehicles. A lot of the reason for that is that cars are becoming more and more complicated. The technology is incredible. And obviously the chip shortage has really shined a light on that. But a lot of the new features that are being introduced into cars today are safety related. So they're collision of pedestrian avoidance, automatic braking, lane departure, automated driving. All those things are safety related. So if anything goes wrong with any of them, it becomes a safety recall automatically. Some people think that, electric vehicles are going to solve it because there's fewer moving parts. It's true, there are fewer moving parts. There's a lot less maintenance required, but they are chock full of the aforementioned technology. And so, as you've probably seen on the news, not to pick on anybody, but the Bolt, the Mach-E, the Tesla, Rivian recently, they've all had issues with pretty large scale recalls because everything that goes wrong with them is safety related essentially. So that's not really going to detract from safety recalls. So it's getting more and more prevalent and it's becoming quite overwhelming for dealerships to deal with. Just the sheer volume of it and trying to keep track of it, not only within their brand, but most dealerships sell used cars as well and trying to keep track of it with their other brands and what they should do. So I actually brought a couple of charts with me today and I wanted to share, just because it puts a little more visual impact on it, some information we've been tracking now for, as I said, over 7 years and sort of categorizing where various groups of vehicles stand in terms of safety recalls. So we have a concept we call open rates. And what that is we take any set of VINs. It could be a set at a fleet, or it could be a rental car company with VINs that they're sending to customers or letting customers drive. It could be a dealership in their inventory. And we take a look at all the vehicles in the group of VINs and how many recalls are present within those VINs. And then we make that a percentage. So that's the chart you're seeing in front of you. As you can see, fleets don't really do that well, or rental car companies. And that's a little scary because that means they're putting potentially customers, employees, drivers out in vehicles with open recalls. But of course, we want to focus on franchise dealers.
Yeah.
And most franchise dealers out there, if we just take a random set of all of their inventory, all the vehicles in their possession, I should say. And I say possession because that includes not just the ones on the lot, but during reconditioning. They've acquired them, they have them, and they're doing something with them. It includes their loaners and their rentals and their demo units and things like that. So every vehicle that's in their control, I'll say, we find that a little short of 15% of them will have open recalls. So that's a pretty high rate. Now, most dealers have some sort of process, as I mentioned. They'll say, I've got the guy that checks them when they come in and checks them when they go out. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But they sort of attest that 15% as being the ones that have no remedy available yet. They can't be fixed. That's simply not the case. It's a matter of not knowing and being unaware of recalls because of the frequency I talked about earlier. They come out in between those times when they're checking. So if I go to the next slide on there, which is really just a build on this, you can see we also track dealerships that have put some more attention towards managing and keeping an eye on recalls at a greater granularity. And the top bar is what we call fully managed. So these are dealerships that have taken every step possible to keep on top of every vehicle that's in their possession at any given time. And you can see there's a dramatic drop, 83% less vehicles in their inventory have open recalls. So why is that? They're down to a few percent. That few percent is exactly what is the ones that are unrepairable at this point in time. They're a lot of recalls come out and they haven't identified a fix yet. So there's a waiting period. Some are fine right away, but some say, oh, we need to manufacture a part or determine the fix. That's what those are. So it's not the 15%, it's the 3%. The remaining 12% sitting in their lot could have been fixed. So the impact is, in the next slide, you can dramatically see the red bar that shows that those are the vehicles that are potentially putting the dealership at risk because they don't know that there is a recall that impacted it while they own it. They might inadvertently deliver the vehicle with an open recall, either hopefully not a new vehicle, but even if a used one without a proper disclosure to the customer, they could be putting somebody at risk. But also, they're missing the opportunity for the ones that are in brand to capture the revenue from the recall fix. Because an average recall fix is about $400. So those 12% in their inventory could have been fixed while they had the vehicle under their control, because it's a lot harder to bring a customer back after the fact to get something fixed than it is to fix it while you still have the vehicle before it goes out. If you get a recall as a consumer and it says car catch on fire tomorrow, you're getting it right in. But if it says, seatbelt tensioner, you kind of put it up in the I'll get to it one day category.
Yeah, when I need an oil change or a tire rotation, or the next time I've got to go, I'll schedule it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So those are tougher. Now you've got to make some effort to get them back in to do that. And so that's the real risk for dealers. And that red bar sort of dramatically, demonstrates that potential.
So why are recalls such a challenge for auto dealers? I mean, is the recall ecosystem just totally broken?
In a perfect world, it would be easy for dealerships to know whether or not a particular vehicle has a recall. I mean, it seems like a fairly simple thing. The problem is there are many, many sources that they might try and ascertain that information. Mm-hmm. For instance, we have the government, right? NHTSA. NHTSA has a couple of ways you can do that. You can download the database of recalls. You can check an individual VIN one at a time. You've got the manufacturers themselves. If it's your franchise, you have some pretty good access to information that, by the way, no other dealers or consumers have access to, which is through their dealer portals. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the manufacturer's public websites, which, Chevrolet.com, Toyota.com, et cetera, where you can, as a consumer or as a non-franchise dealer or a franchise dealer without that brand, look up a particular VIN. Beyond that, another one that people tend to rely on is vehicle history reports. So many of the vehicle history reports have put recalls at the bottom of their pages. You've got Check to Protect, and then myriad other sites that people can go look at that say that they have recall information. The problem is if you check more than one of those sites or multiple of those sites on any given VIN, there's a pretty good likelihood you're going to get a different answer. In fact, we've found over time that there's about a 15% chance that you're going to get a different answer between different sites. So, what do you do? And who's right? And how does a dealer determine they want to do the right thing? They want to repair the vehicle and make sure they disclose it or not put a customer in a potentially dangerous vehicle. How do they know which one's right? If you're only checking one and you think that's right, well, then I guess you have your blinders on. But if you start to check multiples, you question yourself. It's a problem. So the other question is, why does that happen? Certainly there's errors out there. People are people. These companies are made up of people, and sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes systems make mistakes. That's not the biggest problem, though. Isn't purely errors or incorrect information. It's more about timing. So these are large companies, large organizations, agencies, and there's different systems that provide different types of information. They need to sync up internally. They need to sync up with one another, depending on where a different source pulls its information from, the timing of when it does that, when that one was updated versus this one. It becomes really just a matter of timing. So, I'm going to spare you all this, but I've got slide after slide of examples that we see every day where the various sources don't agree with one another and how long it takes for those to sync up. And it's a real problem. Like I said, dealers can be overwhelmed by all that. That's what we mean by broken.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you would hope that you would just have a resource where you could
It'd be
go
right.
to and you would know it's right?
Right.
I mean, you would hope you'd hope the manufacturer would know, or maybe the government would know, or maybe there was a website who would know. But if all three of those are giving you different answers, then you absolutely don't know.
Yeah, and it's examples, like I said, sometimes it's just timing. A dealer may be able to see on their DCS, because they have that franchise, that Chevrolet Silverado has a particular recall. But for whatever reason, it hasn't propagated through other parts of the organization. And as a consumer or a non-Chevy dealer, I might look up that same Silverado on Chevrolet.com, and I'm not picking on Chevrolet, but as an example, that you may get a different answer. And it may only be for a window in time, but that window in time might be the critical moment when you're about to deliver a vehicle to a consumer as a dealer. And so you need to know, and you need to know with some certainty. And that's the problem in the industry.
Yep, I would say I don't think you're picking on Chevrolet. There's definitely not a manufacturer out there without a recall. But
no.
I would wonder if there's even a model of vehicle out there that doesn't have a recall. I mean, you could probably pick any vehicle by any manufacturer, and there's probably a recall on it.
Just
right?
about. The vast majority do. We actually tracked that as well. In fact, I'll throw out a figure. Across all year, make, models since the 90s until now, of all light duty, light commercial, and motorcycles, we track motorcycles too. There are about 18% of them have never had a recall.
Wow.
But that includes a lot of pretty obscure year, make, models with low volumes.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it also includes, we're in the cusp of model year change right now. So a lot of 2023s are on that list because recalls haven't come out on them yet.
Yeah.
But they will, right?
Yeah. There's not a lot of 2023s on the road.
So
right
the
now.
vast majority have recalls. In fact, many of them have many recalls. You know, I'll look at occasionally at a particular vehicle, and it'll show 6 or 7, 8 recalls that have been issued against that particular vehicle for whatever reason, whatever, combination of parts that it used, their suppliers, or build dates, or what have you. So,
with supply chain issues that every business and every manufacturer of everything in the world is having right now, do you anticipate that, like, because a lot of companies have had to change their sources for parts, do you anticipate recalls even becoming more more of them in the coming years?
That's a very real possibility. It's hard to say. I mean, they've had to pivot, right, because of the supply chain issues. They've had to start de-equipping, if that's a word, vehicles. Delivering vehicles without actual content, and then later retrofitting them. Those kinds of things, if they're safety related, could cause issues down the road. And all the signs point to the recalls are not reducing; they're getting worse and worse, right? So, yeah, that's a real possibility.
Dealers have a lot of reasons why they want their vehicles to be recall free when they sell them. I mean, there's moral reasons, there's ethical reasons, there's financial reasons, there's legal reasons. Is it even possible? Is it even possible for a dealer to be sure that the vehicles that he's retailing are recall free?
Yeah. For instance, there's lots of reasons that dealers need and want to be certain. I mean, unfortunately, over the summer here, there have been a couple of headlines in automotive news, for instance, where dealers have been implicated and named in delivering vehicles potentially with open safety recalls that cause some sort of issue for the consumer. But on the used side, it's a lot more confusing, and that's where dealers may or may not know what to do. It's not illegal to sell a used car with an open safety recall. In fact, because oftentimes you can't repair it. It's not within your franchise. But there are many states that have disclosure laws of some varying degree. I would dare say a good number of states do. Tennessee, for instance, has a very strict law because they had an unfortunate incident that involved a young woman and an accident that was as a result of a vehicle that hadn't been repaired. And that led to some attention and legislation in that state where they put some pretty strong language around fixing vehicles that have a safety recall designated a stop sale, as well as disclosing all open recalls when you sell a used vehicle. And in fact, they actually dictate a specific form that must be used by every dealership in the state. So it ranges from that all the way to other states that have all sorts of varying degrees of disclosure. And so you need to know in order to disclose. If you don't know, you can't disclose, right? And some people could have plausible deniability. Well, I checked whatever source, choose your source, right? And it said no. But when it comes down to a court of law, they generally tend to favor the poor consumer, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to say, well, was there a reasonable case that you should have known by checking another source, for instance? So, so you want to be certain as a dealer to avoid those kinds of liabilities and getting afoul of the law. There's another law that impacts dealers around recalls, and it's within the FAST Act. So the Federal FAST Act has a lot of stuff in it. There's a little section that has to do with loaning and renting vehicles and recalls. And basically what it says is, if any entity loans or rents vehicles to consumers and has more than 35 of them, which many dealers have more than 35 loaners, maybe not so much right now, but normally, they will, you must check them and not let a customer take the vehicle if it has an open safety recall. So that means you need to check and check and check every single time of loaners going out the door.
So like if you have a vehicle that goes out twice a day or every day, you need to check twice a day
it could be
or
a problem
every day.
and a lot of work. Yeah. Right. California, again, being a little progressive in these areas, they changed those regulations to 1. So if you so all dealers are impacted. If you have a rental car or a loaner car, you must follow this regulation. And so, so that's a problem, and not all dealers are aware of that. And they could, again, things may be fine until they're not, right? And then you're exposed. And so that's why it's just another reason why you really want to know as a dealership. You want to be certain.
Yeah, I mean, the scenario where you put a car out and somebody checks and you get caught, that scenario is not good. But the ultimate terrible scenario is where somebody has an accident and is either hurt or worse. And it's because of an open recall. I mean, that's a disaster. That's catastrophic.
Exactly. And and obviously, and that gets really to the moral and ethical part of it too, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to harm their customers. I mean, quite the contrary. You want your customers to have confidence in you that you've got their back and you're able to help them navigate this difficult world of recalls and everything else. Right? You have their safety at your heart.
Yeah.
And so, so I mean, those are all great reasons to know. There's another one which is more, economic, which is I touched on a couple of times. There's revenue opportunities. So just knowing gives you the ability to fix, which gives you the ability to generate revenue and profit. So there's just a plain old business reason to know as well. So can they know with certainty? The answer is yes, but it isn't necessarily all that easy because of all the reasons I mentioned earlier with the difficulties in the ecosystem. They need to really take 2 steps. The first one is to be aware of everything I'm talking about and get a little more informed about it, and acknowledge that there are issues that might prevent them from using their current processes, and kind of turn the spotlight inward and take a long, hard, critical look at all those processes. Is the guy that checks it doing it every time, doing it multiple times? What about when he's on a vacation or out sick or what have you? Is the process breaking down anywhere where you might miss things, right? You might not know when a recall came out tomorrow on the vehicle you checked yesterday. And once you sort of take that critical eye to your own processes and you'll see the gaps, then do something about it. And that's where the diligence comes in, where you need to figure out what kinds of things can I do to stop those gaps and make sure that I have, with all reasonable doubt, the ability to ascertain whether there is or isn't a recall on any given vehicle with certainty.
Let's assume that I'm a dealer, and I like making profit, so I want to fix the recalls. I don't want to kill or injure my customers, right. So I don't want to put them out in cars that have open recalls. And I certainly don't want an attorney general knocking on my door because I'm not following the law. So if I want to do the right thing, where do I start? What are the things I need to be doing right now if I'm a dealer, and what can I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are actually 6 things that we suggest that you can do as a dealer, and you can do them all on your own. A couple of them might be more efficient if you have somebody help you, a vendor of some sort. But I actually brought a slide of those so that they can kind of read along as well. And but the first one is you want to focus on the most critical and first step to reduce your risk is to have a policy, have a written policy about recalls that kind of talks about all aspects of, from the acquisition to out the door and even beyond, how your employees are supposed to deal with recalls, what they're supposed to do, what steps they're supposed to take, disclosures, things like that. And of course, it's not enough just to have a policy. You need to make sure everybody's aware of the policy. So communicate it, train everybody, have training, there's a lot of turnover, and so, new employees, make sure they're trained. And we actually recommend that they actually sign the document, that they agree, that they understand the policy and what their responsibilities within their job function is. And the reason for that is not only does that make it real clear with everybody in what they're supposed to do, but it also shifts the risk a bit. Now, in the event of something that happens, the dealership isn't the one without a policy. It's the employee who didn't follow a policy that they were clearly trained on. So it shifts the risk a little bit in terms of liability for any unforeseen event. The second thing they can do, and this is really about increasing the visibility and really portraying a sense of importance around the topic for all of your staff, is to assign a point person. And this is not a full-time job. You don't need to go hire somebody or anything like that. But somebody in the dealerships needs to have the purview of the entire process. And the problem with recalls is it involves everybody. So obviously, new and used sales have some involvement in terms of recalls and disclosing and all those kinds of things, identifying when they take trades, things like that. But the service department has to fix them for in brand, and the parts department has to supply the service department with parts. So it's sort of a multi-department problem. And the only people with that sort of view of the dealership are the senior leadership and the person with the name on the sign. And so you want somebody to have that same sort of perspective about recalls. So just somebody, again, it's a part of their job, not a full-time job, where they have the perspective of making sure that the policy is enforced and measuring and making sure. So for instance, I'll talk about this in a second, but compliance, every vehicle, every time. So is disclosed. They can track that, right, and make sure that the process is followed. And again, it helps reduce that potential risk out there. It helps make sure the customers are, getting safer vehicles, and you're getting every opportunity to look after them.
Well, that would be the person where if the person who checks every day has a heart attack and is out for 3 days, that head person would be the one who would notice.
Who would know, yeah.
I mean, the new car manager is already too busy. The used car manager is already too busy. The general manager and the dealer are probably too busy. And when something unplanned takes place, that would be the way to prevent that from going unnoticed.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and like you said, GM and the dealer principal. I mean, they've got obviously the entire business to run. This is one little aspect of it, so they need somebody kind of looking after it with their point of view. That's the idea with a point person.
Yeah, because it's not a fire that really burns hot until it explodes, right? I mean,
exactly. Right. Yeah, it's like insurance. You don't need it till you need it.
Till you need it. Yeah.
And so the next thing is you want to try and avoid, and this is where a vendor can help, but you can do it yourself. Is you need to have your process as automated as possible, because if it's all manual and people-based, there's opportunity for errors and mistakes. I mean, people make mistakes, it's human nature. People are out, things happen with people. So ideally, you overcome that by fully automating your process. And like I said, you could do it yourself. You can engage with various companies that can help you with that. But it just becomes a bit overwhelming to try and really do that job that brings you to the top of that chart I showed earlier at a few % of vehicles that are open without some sort of automation. It would be a big job. And that sort of brings me to the next couple of points that dealers can do. If they implement any sort of process, it needs to be checking every vehicle every day. Right now inventory turns fairly fast. Seems to be heading towards a little more normalization, but even if their average turn is 30 days only, 30, 45 days, recalls can come out during those 30, 45 days. So if your process was the guy checks in the beginning and the guy checks at the end, what happened in the middle? There could be recalls that come out. So you really need to check every single day. And unfortunately, you can't rely on one source. So it's every single day with multiple sources. And then, if you're going to do it manually, determine which one is accurate, which can be a little challenging. And then kind of also with that is you need to do it for every single vehicle. So I mentioned it's not just the ones on the front line ready for sale. Do it with your vehicles in reconditioning. Do it with your vehicles that are out in loaners. Do it with your demo that your staff is driving. They all need to be checked because they all have different sorts of, I mentioned the FAST Act, and of the reasons to know regardless. While they're in your control, you need to know, and in order to do it, you need to check every single one, every single day with multiple sources. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it can be done. It can be done manually or it can be done in an automated fashion. And the last one is more about the process, which is, be squeaky clean. So back to enforcing the compliance. Make sure that every single vehicle that's sold has a disclosure statement with it, whether it has an open recall or not. A nice professional disclosure, not initialing in the corner of the vehicle history report, which may or may not be accurate. Have a disclosure statement. Great news. The vehicle you're buying, we've identified no recalls in this vehicle, sign here, right? And the customer feels comfortable that you've done your homework, you've done your best to identify recalls, and again, it instills confidence. If there is a recall, disclose it. Hey, there's a recall in this vehicle, we're selling it to you, it doesn't have a remedy at this time, so it can't be fixed, but now you know all about it, and you're signing here that you acknowledge it. You've now made sure that the customer is aware, you've been open and transparent, which of course is very important in the industry these days. And the customers feel good about that you're not hiding anything.
What if you found the recall and you did fix the recall? Would it say that on that form that the vehicle I'm selling you has a recall and you
fixed it?
We have fixed it. So you would put that on the form as well.
You put that on the form. Yeah, it was repaired on this day by this at this time or whatever. This RO number, whatever your form. And like I said, Tennessee has a specific form. Most other states permit the dealers to use their own forms, which is I know like in the last few cars that I purchased myself that were used, they just had me initial the corner of the of the vehicle history report. But at least they were doing something.
Yeah,
at least it was something. It might not have been right. In fact, I know in one case I knew for a fact it was not right.
Well, you have access to a little better data.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, those are the things I think dealers can go off and do with or without help, but and raise elevate their process management to get them in the area of those green bars on that chart that I showed earlier.
Cool. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, if you don't mind, there's a couple of things I think that we could do to help dealers. We have a set of resources that sort of support all the things I just talked about, steps they can do that are free. We want to, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about joining AutoAp, we're very much about helping the industry and helping society at large. And so we want to offer dealers, whether or not they work with us, the ability to do those things because it means something to us. And so the first one we have, I've actually got a chart for this too, so we'll put it up on the screen because it shows you how to get these things as well.
Yep.
We offer a template. So I mentioned the first step that they should take is to establish a process. Now, we are not in a position to give legal advice, right? We're not the lawyers, but we've, through some of our experience in working with these, we've developed a good starting point, a template, the topics that should be in your policy. We recommend that you take that document, which you can get by just emailing us and we'll send it to you, no strings attached, and sit down with your legal counsel, sit down with your state association, and go over and build your policy so that it meets your regional needs, your laws, and your business needs, right? And fits your business. So that's the first resource that we have available. The second one is some stories. It's a best practices white paper, and again, just email us and we'll send it to you. And that talks about different dealerships' experience with navigating this process, implementing new ways of doing things, and the benefits that they derive thereof. So these are real-world experiences from real-world dealers that you can see how it fits with your environment, and I'm sure you'll get tidbits from each one of their stories. The next free resource is on our website, but again, it's free. So we have what we call a performance assessment, a safety liability assessment, safety recall liability assessment. So if you go out there to the website that's on the screen, you can answer 6 easy questions. And at the end of that, we have a process that will generate a report and actually score your liability. In other words, your potential exposure. So it gives you a liability score. It's sort of a proprietary thing of ours, but it gives you a gauge of how much work do you have to do given your current processes. It also then highlights the areas for improvement and then gives some specific recommendations, like the kinds of things I just talked about, where you could shore that up. Right? So again, free resource gives you a guide to going off and doing that introspection of your own process and doing something about it, the diligence to put some things together. And then the last 2 items on the list, Again, you can download them from our request them on our website. Are more informational. It's really to take a much deeper dive into the kinds of things I was talking about. So earlier this year, we published an industry study. And that study really dives a lot deeper into what we talked about in the very beginning, which was the what's going on in the industry around recalls and what the drivers are. And it actually gets down into differences in geography and brands. So you can see certain brands obviously have more prevalence of recalls than others. Certain geographies, believe it or not, do a better job of getting recalls repaired. And so it kind of gives you a lot of insight into a little more depth about the industry at large when it comes to recalls. And then how it impacts dealers specifically, and a little bit about what they can do. You'd have some repeat of the things I talked about today, but it's a little more of a story. It's not really long, but it's a great read. And then lastly, our founder and CEO a few years ago wrote a book specifically about the broken ecosystem. So I spared you all of the examples earlier, but they're all in the book. And it really shines a light on exactly the problems we see in terms of discrepancy of information and why that is, and the timing delays for getting it all synced up and all that kind of thing. Actually, I read the book, and it was one of the things that led me to connect with the company and join, because I found it.
I read it too. Mark
Yeah,
sent
did you?
me one.
Yeah,
He sent
it's
me
quite
one.
eye-opening.
Yeah.
Other than that, obviously, we help dealerships navigate recall management, and we'd love an opportunity, if you're interested, beyond the free resources, to chat with you about how we can help you implement all these things, particularly the automation that I mentioned. So,
Great. Well, thank you, Mark.
yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate it. Again, I hope that the viewers found some value and learned something new today, and go off and make the road more safe for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us on this AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today, my guest has been Mark Allen from AutoAp, and this episode is Over the Curb and Burning Gas. We hope to see you again soon.